Commander William Riker is a linchpin for the Enterprise D. He's Picard's right hand, he'll never leave a crew member behind, and he wins the prize for most romantic bridge crew officer on board. But what if Captain Picard never made it back from the Borg attack? Do you think Riker has what it takes to sit in the big chair? In this live stream, we will break down what might have happened in the Star Trek universe if Riker became captain instead. So grab your phaser and your transporter twin, and let's start the show.
Hello and welcome to the Savage Stream, the weekly live stream where we talk all things Star Trek. And today we're going to talk about what would happen if, in Best of Both Worlds Part 1, when Riker says, Lieutenant Worf, fire, if they actually fired and the Borg cube was completely destroyed. What would happen next? We've got no more Captain Picard. We're not going to get to see him come back as a recurring villain, which would be actually pretty fun. Borg cube is done. No attack on Wolf 359. No attack on Earth. What could possibly change in all the subsequent episodes of TNG and all the rest of the Star Trek franchise? There are timestamps below, so you can jump ahead at any time. But let's start with the first key difference that I think might happen. Season 4, Episode 21, The Drumhead. An investigation into a possible attack against the Enterprise spirals into a witch hunt under Admiral Satie's direction. Even though Geordi and Data find the explosion was caused by fatigue and not sabotage, Satie is determined to rout out all traitors and bring them to justice. Finally, Picard gives one of his classic impassioned speeches, which brings the trial to a satisfying close. So this episode would have gone very differently. Just to give some background information, what was happening was that there was an explosion in engineering and Admiral Satie was brought in because the thought was there was some kind of sabotage going on board. So she comes in and she's like, this is my specialty. I am the Admiral of Investigations. I'm going to rout out any traitors in this place. They come to find that there is a Klingon on board who is actually a spy. He is encoding secret messages into his amino acids, I believe. So he's making like these secret messages as protein strings that he's injecting into himself with a hypo spray and somehow transmitting that information to the Romulans. That's already shady, but we know there are some Klingons who are working with the Romulans to do shady stuff at this point. So it's just kind of like one link in a chain of a longer story that's being told throughout this season. But so we find that out, and that kind of spurs on Admiral Satie because she's like, okay, proof, right? We've got this Klingon who's actually a spy and working for the Romulans. So he had to be involved with this sabotage. Well, Geordi and Data do an investigation and they discover that the part that malfunctioned, it wasn't really sabotaged, it just was fatigued. So it was just kind of not user error, but a mechanical error. It was not a sabotage. So they're like, oh, that sucks. I think we better take this thing back into space dock to just like check out all the bulkheads and stuff. So everybody's happy with that explanation, except for Admiral Satie, because this is her thing. So she comes in and she's like, I'm going to find the traitor. I'm going to find the saboteur. And they're like, dude, there is no saboteur. We literally just proved that. And she's like, yeah, you may not think there's one, but I feel it in my bones. Okay. So then she does this whole big investigation to try to rout out the traitor. And she is looking at everybody. I mean, Beverly's on trial, Riker's on trial, everyone's on trial. She does end up finding this one crewman who claims to be half Vulcan because he's got the pointy ears, but they come to find out that he's actually half Romulan. And she's like, aha, another traitor in our midst. But he's just like, look, I didn't want to say I was Romulan because they're like not in the Federation and they're the enemy. So I just told people I was Vulcan. Y'all can't tell. Ears are ears. And I've just been doing my job, minding my business, not doing any spycraft whatsoever. And Admiral Satie is like, that's exactly what a spy would say. So here's the thing. Picard is incredible at negotiation and politicking and all of his kind of ambassadorial roles that he plays, even though he's a captain and not technically an ambassador, he's really good at that. And so he's trying to talk sense into Admiral Satie this whole time. Also, recognizing that she's a higher authority than him and respecting her position, but also saying, let's think about this logically. We've already discovered this is not sabotage. This poor kid, you're putting him through the ringer, trying to ruin his career, calling him a traitor and all kinds of things when his only crime was being born part Romulan, which was not his choice, And she is not trying to hear it because this is her thing. Like she finds traitors wherever she goes, like magic. She finds them. So she's not trying to listen. He's trying to talk some sense into her. Not working. Then he eventually quotes her father, whom he was a big fan of, a big admirer, and I think knew personally. I think her father like worked at I don't know where, I don't remember how they met, but I don't know if he like took a course with him or like something, but I think he actually knew Admiral Satie's father and had read his books and all this stuff. And so he quotes Admiral Satie's father to her about her own behavior and is like, I don't know, he says something about going on witch hunts and how that's terrible for freedom and yada yada. So she goes off on him. Okay, he says this while he's in the tribunal, he's on stage because he made the cardinal mistake of questioning her one too many times. So all of a sudden she's like, aha, another traitor in our midst. So she's questioning him about his actions and what about when he was Locutus of Borg and what all was he doing? What was he up to? Maybe he's a spy for the Borg, all this stuff. So when he quotes her father, she loses her mind. And she's like, I knew it. You were a traitor all along. And she does all this stuff. She does this big outburst. And the other admiral who's there to observe the proceedings realizes that she has lost it and is like, all right, you know what? Tribunal's over. Trial over. Because now he sees that this is really a witch hunt and there's no value in this. She's gone off her rocker. We're not going to believe anything that she has said about this whole situation because she's very emotionally involved and not necessarily looking at the facts. Everything is resolved. I'm guessing, I believe that Admiral Satie was even retired at this point and they like brought her out of retirement for this. You can fact check me on that. But I'm sure after this moment, if she wasn't retired, she was retired after this particular event because it was like, boo boo, you're seeing ghosts everywhere. And I think you just need to rest. You know, you need like a break from this life. A little too stressful. If Riker was captain, I think this would have gone down completely differently because this is not Riker's gift. Okay. He's not the gift. He's not gifted at politicking and being an ambassador and being diplomatic and all of that. That's not his strong suit. It's not his jam. Now he's got a lot of gifts. That's just not one of them. So I do not think he would have been able to talk Admiral Satie off the ledge. To be fair, Picard did not talk her off the ledge either. But I also don't think he would have been able to pull a quote out of the air that he knew would trigger Admiral Satie and then shut this whole thing down. I think that if Riker were captain in this situation, Admiral Satie would have gotten every single person in the bridge arrested for treason. They'd all be serving on a penal colony right now, right along with Ensign Rowe. And I think every member of the crew would be reassigned to some other ship. This is my prediction for if Riker was captain. What are your thoughts? Let me know in the comments. I'm going to check those really quick, and then we're going to head to the next pivotal point on the list that I think would have been quite different if Riker was captain. Hello to everybody who's watching live. Hello to everybody who's watching on the replay. By the way, timestamps are below, so if you want to skip ahead to the next episode, you can do so at any time. Okay, lots of hellos. Oh, thank you so much, Nadia. So when Grace asked, does Riker wrestle Robert in the mud? No, Riker does not. No one gets to wrestle with Robert. He gets to sit in the mud all by himself. Yeah, Nadia's quoting Admiral Satie. I brought down bigger men than you, Picard. Famous last words. Yep, PS2 Chipper says classic witch hunt. Crazy Normie YT says just like the Salem trials. Exactly. Yeah, I'm not sure. Nadia says, I feel like Picard took a class with Father Satie at the academy. I don't remember how they know each other, but I do remember he said, like, not only did he quote Admiral Satie's father's law book or whatever, because I think he was a lawyer. He quoted a book, so I know he read his books, but I remember him also saying something about a lecture. So I don't know if this is a talk he gave. I don't know if this is the academy. I don't know if this is, one of these conferences on Ryza that he attended, but I feel like they knew each other at some point. When Grace says Riker would say to Satie, shut up, as in close your mouth and stop talking. Yeah, that line was wild. That was from Future Imperfect, which is such a fun episode. Yeah, Crazy Normie says poor Captain Riker and crew. Exactly. Poor Captain Riker and crew. Nadia says the final scene between Picard and the Admiral was TNG's answer to the scene in A Few Good Men when Tom Cruise tricked Jack Nicholson into admitting the code red. You can't handle the truth. Right. But in this case, Admiral Satie, not only can she not handle the truth, she can't handle anything but her truth. And that was the problem, is that people were not getting on board with that. Okay, so that's done. Now let's look at another episode where I think Riker as captain would have made things go down pretty differently. Season 5, Episode 19, The First Duty. The Enterprise returns to Starfleet Academy to find that Wesley Crusher and his friends are facing an inquiry after a flight training accident results in the death of a teammate. Nick Locarno pressures the group to cover up the truth, but Picard encourages Wesley to be honest, no matter the cost. Wesley confesses in open court, and Locarno takes full responsibility, changing the trajectory of all of their lives forever. So in this case, we've got Wesley and team that have become a part of this mysterious death investigation. Okay, so it wasn't technically a murder, but I would say it's closer to manslaughter on Nick Locarno's part because he was the ringleader of all of this. So what happened was their crew of 5 were trying to do this Culber starburst maneuver where all 5 shuttles come in and they fly away from each other and they ignite their plasma trail, and it makes this cool spectacle. And Nick Locarno was like, wouldn't this be great? Because we're a Nova Squadron. We're like the hottest flyers in school. Wouldn't it be great if we did this amazing feat at graduation that hasn't been seen in like 50 years or something like that? I think it was 50 years or 150 years, but I think it was 50 years. So he's like, wouldn't this be fun? And they're all like, yeah, it might be fun. He's like, come on, guys. And they're like, all right. So they're practicing. And while they're practicing, something happens, and one of the 5, his ship explodes. Like it crashes, it explodes. So now there's an investigation into what exactly was happening. What maneuvers were you guys doing? How did this happen? So of course they're not going to admit that they were doing this starburst Culber maneuver because it was, I can't say illegal because it's not like what are they going to do? Go to jail? It wasn't illegal, but it was like banned. It was forbidden. You know, this is their Harry Potter moment. Do not go into the Forbidden Forest unless you go with me. And then we go every night. So it's forbidden to go to do this particular maneuver, but they were going to do it because they were going to awe everybody and just be like the most amazing things ever. So now they don't want to admit it, but they have to explain why this kid is dead. So they're like, well, we were doing this totally other maneuver, and then we don't know what happened to him. He just kind of freaked out, and then he just crashed. We don't know, right? And that's sounding really not believable. But no one can prove otherwise. I guess these shuttles didn't have any kind of black box. And I guess there was no surveillance on the side of the moon they were racing on. I don't know. But somehow no one could just recreate what happened until Picard figured it out. So now they're having this trial. The kids are all acting really suspicious. They can't prove anything. And Nick Locarno was telling them all, we don't know what happened in this guy's mind. Maybe he did freak out. That, as far as we know, that's true. He freaked out and he crashed. We don't have to tell them all the details, but that's probably what happened. And Wesley was like, this feels a lot like lying. And Nick Locarno was like, it's not at all like lying. It's telling as much truth as we know, or something like that, which is, lying. So Picard is the one who actually confronts Wesley. And because they have that kind of mentor-mentee bond, he was like, look, your first duty is to the truth. If you are going to be in Starfleet, if you're going to be an officer, you need to tell the truth, what really happened. That's what matters. Forget the consequences. Doesn't matter. You have to be a person of integrity. And Wesley's like, shoot, you're right. I have to be a person of integrity. So he goes back. I mean, they're about to close the trial. They've already concluded we can't prove anything. So, and the main tribunal leader, head judge, whatever, Dean, who knows what actually her title was, but she says, I'm very disappointed in you all. So she knows something's up, but like I said, she couldn't prove anything. They couldn't prove anything. So she was going to let them all off the hook. But Wesley was like, I have one more thing to say. And he comes clean about the whole thing. Nick Locarno takes responsibility for everyone. He says, it was actually all my idea. I pressured the other people into doing it. Please spare them and let everything fall on me. So they're like, okay, cool with that. They expel him. And then he comes back for fiery revenge in Lower Decks season 4. Highly recommend watching that season. Amazing. But anyways, they expel him. And then they let the other kids continue school, but they erase that entire year. So they have to repeat an entire year of schooling. And of course, everyone in the school knows what they did, which was do something dangerous that got their friend killed and then cover it up, try to cover it up so they can get away with it, right? So now everybody's looking at them funny. I think if Riker were captain, this would have gone completely differently. He does not have that mentor-mentee bond with Wesley. First of all, I don't know if he would have figured out that they were up to some sneaky maneuvers. I don't think so. I don't even think he would have gone down to the planet. The only reason why Picard went to the planet is because he was going to be speaking at graduation. So, I don't know, maybe Riker might have been speaking at graduation, sure. Doesn't seem like a Riker-y thing to do, but maybe. However, I don't know if he would have even picked up on this whole thing. And even if he had, I don't think he has the kind of connection with Wesley that could really get through to him the way that Picard's great, moral speeches always get through. So I think Riker being like, your first duty is to the truth. And then him, putting his foot up on a chair, I don't think that would have just played as well. So I think if Riker were captain, Wesley wouldn't have said anything. His entire Nova Squadron would have got away with manslaughter. Nick Locarno would be off piloting Voyager into the Delta Quadrant, and Wesley would not have gotten disillusioned with Starfleet because he wouldn't have been treated like crap for his last 2 years. He probably would have gone on to be a pretty mediocre officer because this would have weighed on his conscience, but also he can't come clean. I think he might have been a little too attached to Synthahol, something tells me. And he would have probably never become a traveler because his disillusionment with Starfleet led him to his emo moment and his rebellion and him becoming a traveler. And had he not become a traveler, that would have been very bad for the kids of Prodigy and also destructive and potentially catastrophic for the Prime Line. So in short, had Riker been captain, it might have destroyed the world. Those are my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts in the chat, and then we'll go to the next episode on the list. Let's see. Wingrace says, if Riker and crew got arrested, who would Boimler's idol be? That's a good question. I don't know, because Riker's a good one. Maybe he would have had to pull from TOS or another ship. I'm not sure. Let's see. PS2 Chipper says to Nick Locarno, if the truth won't set you free, lie. Because the lie the lie might set you free. In this case, it could have. Crazy Normie YT says, these outcomes are making me appreciate Picard more. Yes, same. Nadia says, I think Riker would have gotten the surveillance video the same as Picard. I don't know if that was surveillance video. I think that was a recreation that Picard made, and he took some leaps of logic and was like, I think this is what you're doing based on how the wreckage was found, yada, yada, yada. I think he did some CSI stuff. I don't think they just had footage. I could be wrong, but that's kind of what I remember because he showed the maneuver being done and he said, I think this is what you guys were doing because of where you were in the moon and blah, 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 blah. Why are you guys so close to each other? How could the plasma have ignited? So I think he kind of did some sleuthing on that. Okay, he would have gotten involved because of his relationship with Wesley. In season 2, he was in charge of Wesley while Beverly was at Starfleet Medical. What? Help me remember a time where Riker and Wesley had a moment. I can think of when he went to ask for Riker's advice on girls in the Dauphin, and that was a good idea because Riker's the person to ask for that. But I can't think of any time when Riker was in charge of Wesley. I know Wesley had a mission in Pen Pals. Maybe Riker gave him that mission. I don't know. Let me know some moments where you feel like they did have a connection where Riker could have gotten through. Nadia says, in the beginning of TNG, Riker was closer to Wesley than Picard. You know what? In the beginning of TNG, Tasha Yar was closer to Wesley than anyone else. It was planned in the TNG Bible that was going to be the paired relationship. So some of these relationships we see were actually always part of the plan. Data and Geordi, I actually don't know if that was part of the plan because Data's character was totally different. Data's character actually was a lot like Dash in Picard. That's how Data's character was supposed to be. Was supposed to be Asian, was supposed to look completely human, not android at all. You couldn't even tell he was an android, a lot of different things. So actually, I don't remember the Geordi and Data one, but I do know Riker and Worf were supposed to be friends, and Tasha Yar and Wesley were supposed to be friends. That was supposed to be the bond that we see over time, which is kind of weird. Right? It's weird. Why would they be friends? I don't know. I don't think they had enough time to flesh out why that relationship would just be natural and they would connect. It kind of makes sense for Wesley to be friends with Geordi because Wesley's an engineering genius. And so is Geordi. Makes sense for Geordi and Data to be friends because Data's is an android and Geordi's a engineer. The Worf and Riker thing, I don't know if that makes as much sense. That seems a little random. And also their friendship, I never fully bought into the way I love Data and Geordi. But Tasha and Wesley, I was like, what? I don't get that at all. Anyways, moving on. When Grace says if Riker was captain, Locarno would have salamander babies with Janeway. Not the salamander babies. It's like you can never get rid of those things. Nadia says Riker is also considered one of the best pilots in the Enterprise, so he may have figured out the Starbus maneuver. Ooh, that's a good point. That's a good point. He might have, but could he have convinced Wesley to tell the truth? But that is a really good point. He totally could have figured that out because he's a great pilot. PS2 Chipper says it's because Picard is old that he remembered the maneuver. He's old enough to remember, maybe, but he's also like he's an anthropologist, a bit of a historian. So he may also know that from like his readings. When Grace says Riker had Wesley on ship. On ship in the battle drill where he stuck back to the Enterprise to steal his experiment. Right. That was the Stargazer episode. What was the name of that episode? I don't remember, but that was the episode where we learned about the Picard maneuver and the original Riker maneuver before it became just sitting in a chair really weird. Yes, that was a moment. So I will give you that. They did have that moment. Nadia says, in the beginning of season 2, when Wesley was getting permission to stay on board, they were saying that Riker would be in charge of him, others would help him with the studies, and Worf would tuck him in. I don't remember Worf tucking him in. I missed that part of the episode. Yeah, that War Games episode was fun, although Damon Bach is the worst. Ugh. If I never see Damon Bach again, it'll be too soon. Okay. Next thing that I think would be a little bit different if Riker was captain. Season 6, Episode 1, Time's Arrow Part 2. The crew of the Enterprise travels back to 19th century Earth to rescue Data. He and the crew uncover an alien plot to harvest human life forces. Guinan uses her connections to help the crew get back home while also being constantly harassed by Mark Twain. So other than Mark Twain, who I despised in these episodes, Time's Arrow Part 1 and 2 are super fun episodes. But here's what I think would be different. Actually, let me take a step back. Time's Arrow, if you do not recall, starts with them finding Data's decapitated head buried in San Francisco in a mine shaft. And they find the head and they call in the Enterprise to come back to Earth. And they're like, we just found this head. And Picard's like, Data, is this yours? And Data's like, yep, that's my head. And everybody's like, what? Because they're like, this head's been here for a really, really long time, for like hundreds of years. How has your head been here for hundreds of years? And Data's like, well, it's simple. At some point, I go back into the past and then I'm killed. And then my head is left in a cave, obviously. And they're like, okay. So then Picard's like, no away missions for you. You get to stay on board forever. And Data's like, that doesn't make any sense because there's nothing we can do to change the future. Like, this has already happened. We found the head. It already happens. So they do end up going to the past through another planet that has another cave that connects to old-timey San Francisco. And Data does end up going back. His head does end up getting left. It's a whole thing. But here's what I think would be different. In Time's Arrow Part 2, Captain Picard is stranded in the past, and he's helping Guinan, who they've just met. He's helping Guinan because she was injured in the cave, and they need somebody to help them. She needs medical attention. He can't leave her to go get medical attention because she's so endangered. But he also can't go back to the future because the little portal that was activated has already closed, and it can only be activated by the Ophidian, by like the alien staff, right? Like the alien magic is the only thing that can open the portal or whatever. Here's what I think would be different. If Locutus of Borg was destroyed, okay, and Riker was captain, that means Shelby would be the first officer. In this scenario, when Riker goes back to the future, he's like, we can't bomb the cave. We can't leave Captain Picard behind. We have to do whatever we can to get him. And everybody else is like, well, Picard wouldn't want that because people are being killed on Earth. We need to blow up the cave. We need to blow up everything happening on Davidia 2 so that way we can protect Earth. And Worf is like, fire, because he's like now the first officer, right? So he's like, we got to fire upon it. We got to get rid of it. We got to protect Earth. And Riker's like, fine, I'll go back and I'll trade places with Picard. And they're like, you can't do that. He wouldn't want that. It's a whole thing. Eventually, Mark Twain goes back, which good riddance. And then Picard's able to go to the future. If this were Riker and Shelby, I think Shelby would have fired immediately. I think she would have taken the ship and been like, that's right. I've been looking for this captain's chair for years. I think she would have happily become captain and been like, rest in peace, Riker. The Earth is now saved. Now, what she wouldn't know is that the Earth is not saved, right? Because that was like the message in Data's head or whatever about don't fire on the cave until the phase shift variance. Or maybe she would have still gotten that message and maybe she would have made the phase shift variance and whatever. But I don't think she would be like, I'll trade my life for Riker's. Just let me go back and make sure he's here. I think she'd be like, woo, Captain Shelby. That's what I'm talking about. I've been writing that in my journal for the last 3 years. That's what I think. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and then we will go to the next episode. Oh, there we go. Okay, the episode with Damon Bach is called The Battle. It is season 1, episode 9. Thanks, Google. Thanks, Nadia. Yeah, I could not remember the name of that episode. I was like, it's something with fighting. But The Battle. If you haven't seen The Battle in a while, I can't really recommend it because, like I said, Damon Bach's the worst. But there are some fun war game elements that are nice to see. When Grace says the biggest tragedy in this scenario is never hearing Picard say type R. 1000%. My favorite line from the entire episode, from both episodes, is that part. Type R, when he's so offended by the type of discriminator or whatever that's inside of Data's head. We wouldn't get that, and that's super sad. Nadia says the snake people thingies, Ophidians, not sure, were creepy AF. Yes, the snake things were creepy, and I also kind of like how they showed the snake things, how they showed them when they were showing the phase variants, and they were kind of like these glowy lights, and Data was describing them, and they were like this bluish glowy thing, and you could see like the human souls being sucked into their foreheads, into their like little mouths or whatever. That was really cool and nicely done. And I think it was smart because they didn't have to actually create an alien. They didn't have to make an alien look. They just were like, look, it's weird and glowy lights because of phase variance, right? And then Data could just describe what's happening. There are these aliens. They are, and I think that I don't know what the aliens totally look like other than humans with like mouths coming out of their foreheads. But the Ophidians were the snake staffs that they used to open up portals. So I don't know if that was like an extension of them, another part of their being, or if that was their form of transporters or phasers or something. I don't know. I don't know how their technology was connected to their like morphology, their biology. But I think that was a really good move because it left some mystery to what these aliens look like. And when we see them in old-timey San Francisco, they just look like regular people. And then we're like, oh, these aliens can shapeshift. That's neat. So they didn't even have to come up with alien makeup for that. They're just regular people in old-timey clothes. And then when they die, they like phase shift into that blue glow and disappear, which is also kind of neat, right? It's like they didn't even leave any evidence. That's the smooth criminal right there. And Nadia says, I don't think Shelby would have remained first officer of the Enterprise. I think she would have left not too long after the Borg incursion and Data would be number 1. I disagree. And here's why. Shelby was gunning for Riker's job. That's why they got in that trouble in the first place. Riker was offered captaincy of the Melbourne, I think. And so she came on being like, great, you're going to go be a captain. The Enterprise could use a new first officer. I'm here and ready to work, right? And Riker was like, back off, Shelby. This is still my chair. Like, I'm still sitting in it. Stop trying to get in there. So I think if she would have gotten the chance, which she did get the chance to become first officer, I don't think she would have given that up easily. I don't think she would have been like, well, the Borg thing's over, so back to what I was doing, because this was her goal. This was her ambition. I guess, I forget, I think it was, I don't know if it was Win Grace or it was Best of Trek, Worst of Trek, but somebody had said, how is Shelby the expert on Borg when the first people to meet the Borg was the Enterprise? I don't know the answer to that question. So after she leaves the ship, she does go on to be like a Borg expert or something. But I think she could have still done her Borg expert thing on the Enterprise, and maybe even more so because the Enterprise got so many more opportunities to meet the Borg than other ships because it's a flagship and it's always going out to most dangerous missions and it's always going into deep space. So I think she would have held on to that first officer chair with her teeth. That's what I think. Wingrace says, fun fact, the bad guys from this episode come back as the main enemies from the finale of the Star Trek novel series. The bad guys from this episode. The aliens? Really? Huh. How do they come back? You know what? I'm gonna just accept that and know that their story keeps going, which is unfortunate. Nadia says, yeah, but the snake thingies, human forms were creepy too. You're so right about that, Nadia. The snake form thingies, the aliens, when they had shapeshifted into humans, were pretty creepy because they were also serial killers, right? They were just going around sucking out energy from people and dumping it back into the cave. So when they walked up on people, they had that predator energy that was pretty creepy. I will completely agree. Nadia says Shelby was gunning for Riker's job, but rebuilding the fleet and making it Borg ready was also a great feather in her cap. True. In this case, if they would have destroyed the cube before it even left that system, they wouldn't have had as much, the fleet wouldn't have been destroyed, and that wouldn't have needed to be rebuilt. However, they would still need to be on their guard about the Borg. Okay, next episode here's the next episode I think would be quite different if Riker were captain.
Season 6, Episode 4, Relics. The Enterprise discovers a Dyson sphere and a crashed Federation ship where they find Captain Montgomery Scott suspended in a transporter buffer for 75 years. Initially frustrated by Scotty's outdated methods, Geordi eventually learns to appreciate his experience and ingenuity. Ultimately, the two work together to help the Enterprise escape the Dyson sphere before it gets destroyed.
I love this episode. It is easily one of my favorite episodes. It's so great. We get to see Scotty in all of his engineering glory, and we get to see Geordi in his engineering glory, and we get to see how the two compare and contrast. So in this episode, we see a Dyson sphere, which is dope. Like, it's so interesting. And when we see this Dyson sphere, Geordi and Scotty are on his shuttle kind of trying to like repair it and get some data off of it or whatever. And while they're doing that, the Enterprise is just kind of scanning. They find this aperture, they find this portal, this like airlock in the Dyson sphere, and they're scanning it just to see like what's going on. But that scan triggers, it's like ringing the doorbell or whatever. It triggers the opening and it causes these tractor beams to pull the Enterprise into the Dyson sphere. Now, the Dyson sphere itself, it's a structure built around a star, like built around a sun. And so this big, gigantic mechanical structure has an entire biosphere inside. So instead of a round planet with a round sun, and the planet has to rotate around the sun to make sure all the parts of the planet is heated, instead, the planet is like flat on the inside of the Dyson sphere. The sun's in the middle, and everything gets sun all day long, which sounds amazing. But in this case, the sun had become unstable, or maybe it was just old and it was time and it was about to go supernova. So the amount of radiation coming from that sun was now deadly. So now everything on the inside of that Dyson sphere could not survive. So it had been abandoned, but the technology was still working. But they didn't quite know how to work it because the technology of the Dyson sphere was not compatible with the technology of the Enterprise. So once they scanned it, that was enough for it to open and automatically pull them in. But they had no idea how to open the doors again and get back out. And of course, because the star is at a certain phase in its life, the amount of radiation it's producing is so high that the people can only survive for like, I think they said like 3 more hours or something crazy. Like everybody on the ship is about to die of radiation poisoning within the next few hours. Meanwhile, Geordi and Scotty have no idea. They're in the shuttle tinkering around and, talking or whatever. And then at some point they're like, where's the ship? Did you see the ship? I haven't seen the ship. And then they try to like figure out what's going on and they end up saving the day. It's amazing. If you haven't seen this episode in a while, highly recommend. Now, here's the difference that I think would have happened had Riker been captain. So here in this episode, Picard comes and talks to Scotty because he's feeling kind of useless and old and thrown away. He's trying to help. He's trying to work with Geordi in engineering. He's trying to figure out the Dyson sphere. This is before they get sucked in. And Geordi is like, dude, your knowledge is 75 years out of date. And we're talking technology. And you all know how fast technology changes. 75 years, it might as well be a million years, right? Basically, nothing you know now can help us with what we're doing today, because your knowledge is so outdated. So Geordi is like, you are in my way. You are slowing me down. So Scotty's feeling really bad about himself, and he's feeling useless, and he's feeling old. He was already on his way to retire when the ship he was on, the Janolan, crashed. Like, he was on his way to retirement. So he's really feeling like, oh, I'm so washed up. Picard comes to talk to him, They have some Aldebaran whiskey. They have a chit chat, and Picard's like, hey, you still got it, man. Like, you got all this wisdom and experience. It's not time to give up. You've had amazing things happen to you, and you have so much to offer and so much to give. You're not done yet. And then he goes and talks to Jordan. He's like, hey, Scotty, I know you're having some conflicts with him, but he's amazing. You need to make it work. Like, find a way to make him feel useful. And that's how they end up back on the Janolan. And he's like, I could really use your help, Scotty, because these are systems that you're more familiar with than me. And you know how everything's been jury rigged together because you jury rigged it. So let's work together. And that's how they kind of get talking. That's how they become more friends and get on the same page. That's how they end up saving the day, getting the Enterprise out. And then Scotty's like, what was I thinking retiring? I have so much more life left in me. I want to go explore. I want to go do this. I want to go do that. So they give him a shuttle. They loan him a shuttle. They give him a shuttle so he can go and continue to explore. Right? Beautiful, beautiful, wonderful story. Now, if Riker were captain, I don't think he could have had that moment with Scotty over Aldebaran whiskey. And here's why. When Picard is talking to him, he's talking to him as an equal, right? I mean, they're very different people, but they are both captains. And so they have they're both Starfleet captains. They have some common ground. And also Picard's a lot older, so he might be able to relate to Scotty feeling like a little bit older and the youngsters are, moving faster than me or whatever. And Picard's able to talk to him on that level of like, you're not done. You've been through so much. You've still got more to give, and go convince Geordi to give him another chance. I don't think Riker would have even had that perspective. I think he would have been like, oh, that kind of sucks. Sucks to be Scotty. You know what I mean? But I don't think he would have been able to have that conversation with Scotty in a way that convinced him that he still got more to give. He could have ordered Geordi to take him to the ship, sure, but I don't even think they would have done that. I don't think he would have sought out Scotty in the holodeck to chit chat with him, to have a drink, to, talk about old times. I don't think any of that would have happened. Now, had none of that happened, and had Geordi not been ordered to take Scotty onto the Janolan, the Enterprise would have gotten stuck in the Dyson sphere and everyone would have died. That is what I think would have happened in this episode if Riker were captain. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and then we'll go to the next episode. Okay, let's see. PS2 Chipper says, the Dyson Sphere comes back in Star Trek Online and acts as a Stargate to the Delta Quadrant. That is so cool. That is so cool. I had no idea. Nadia says, yay, the sideways Enterprise escape. I never understand why watching the Enterprise roll is so cool, but come on. We all think it's awesome. You know what it always reminds me of? Like, that particular scene feels so Star Wars to me, right? The hatch is closing and the ship turns sideways and sneaks out just in time. And I have to say, it's similar to watching anything go through the transporters. It never gets old. It's always cool. It's always cool. Same thing with things being replicated. Every time something just like appears, it's always cool. I literally never get tired of it. Yeah, this episode is super fun, and that escape is amazing. And you know what I noticed today when I was watching it? The Janolan wedges itself into the door. So they do the same thing. They scan the opening to the Dyson sphere. It opens, but the tractor beams don't lock onto it for some reason. And it flies into the door, and it puts up this big force field that keeps the doors from closing. So it's like wedging open the doors long enough for the Enterprise to fly out, because they have no idea how to open it from the inside. But in order for the Enterprise to fly out, they have to blow up the Janolan so that there's space for them to get out. So here's what I noticed is that instead of waiting till they're like feet from the Janolan and then blowing it up, or just like flying through it, I feel like that little shuttle would do almost no damage to the Enterprise. But whatever. Instead, they blow it up when they're like really far away, and you could see it. They're like, Picard's like, fire torpedoes, and they fire torpedoes, and then immediately the doors start to close, and the Enterprise is like way over here, and you're like, buddy. And so they get out by like the skin of their teeth. Like, the Enterprise flies out just as the doors are closing. And today as I was watching that clip, I was just like, why didn't you just wait a little longer? I don't know if it needed to be such a close call. Make sure you can get out. Make sure you're not trapped inside of this space, and that no parts of the ship get scraped off when those doors close. But yeah, this is a great, great episode. Yes, this is Scotty saying, what is this? And Data saying, it is green. So it was Aldebaran whiskey, and that's because Scotty went to 10 forward to get some, because he was feeling sad about his life, and so he went to go get some alcoholic comfort at 10 forward, but everything was synthahol. So he was like, what is this? This isn't even real alcohol. So then Data gave him something green, and he drank it, and he was like, all right, this is what I'm talking about. This is alcohol. And then when he goes to have drinks with Picard's like, it's Aldebaran whiskey. I'm the one who gave it to Guinan. It's a really cute moment. Nadia says, in a Dyson sphere, does the sun ever set or is it daytime all the time? Well, based on the shape and the construction in this episode, it's daytime all the time, because the way that sunset happens on the Earth, the way that sunset happens, the sun's not setting, right? Because the sun isn't moving, but the planet itself is rotating. So sunset is when the side that you're on the planet, when the face that you're on turns away from the sun, it looks like the sun has set, the sun has gone away. And when that side of the planet turns back towards the sun, now it's daytime or whatever. It's sunrise. The sun has come back. Now, in this case, the sun is stationary. The Dyson sphere is also stationary, but there's also no like dark side of the Dyson sphere. There's no side that's not facing the sun. So I think it's daytime all the time, which sounds awful. My guess is because they had the technology to build a structure around a freaking star. My guess is that they also have technology to create darkness inside of dwellings, like to create complete darkness. That'd be my guess. But it's wild, right? Grace says, if you've never heard it, go listen. Scotty reads the audiobook novelization of this episode. What? And he does all the TNG voices as well. Fun fact, he doesn't know how they're supposed to sound. What are you talking about, Grace? The novelization of this episode? I did not know there was a novel of this episode. That sounds like a lot of fun. PS2 Chipper says, also in the beta canon, Scotty goes back to school to get caught up on the technology. Eventually, Scotty goes back to work and he starts teaching. Yeah, I totally believe that. Because Scotty's not ready to retire. I also see him just kind of like a engineering version of Indiana Jones, just like flying around the quadrant and finding these interesting engineering puzzles and coming to save the day and like making lots of friends and fixing things, kind of like a Quantum Leap type of deal. But instead of jumping into different people's bodies and fixing their lives, he's like coming upon, derelict ships that are falling apart and he comes in and fixes them. And maybe that ship from the episode Bliss in Voyager with the telepathic picture plant, that ship that's like totally falling apart because he keeps going into the monster's mouth and then he gets, pulled apart and then he comes out of the monster's mouth and he tries to put the ship back together. Maybe he comes upon that ship and he's like helping him fix it. That'd be fun. I would totally watch that show. PS2 Chipper says they also figure out how to use the transporters through shields. Yeah, they figured out just for this episode and not any other episodes. It's really inconsistent, their shield technology. PS2 Chipper says, I think the aliens just use sleeping masks. Can you imagine, though, if you were like trapped in a metal dome with a sun? I don't know how strong those sleeping masks would be. Crazy Normie YT says the Dyson sphere is both amazing and horrifying. I completely agree. Nadia says maybe the aliens who made the Dyson sphere were photosynthetic, hence the Arctic Circle like 100% daytime. That is an interesting thought. That is a super interesting thought. I never pictured that, but that'd be so cool. And I also want to watch that. Now there's photosynthetic aliens that live inside a Dyson sphere. I'm in. I'm watching that show. Like I would totally watch that whole show. Okay, here's the next episode where I think things would have gone quite differently if Riker were captain. Season 6, Episode 11, Chain of Command, Part 2. Picard is captured by the Cardassians and tortured by Gul Madrid, who seeks information about Federation defenses. Picard resists both physical and mental assaults until he's rescued by Captain Jellicoe's unique negotiation tactics. So, Chain of Command, which is one of Picard's best episodes, in my opinion, but also like a bummer, right? Like it's a very serious, heartbreaking set of episodes. Really, part 2. Part 1 is not heartbreaking at all. Part 1 is just the setup for part 2, which is where all the meat is. Here's what I think would be different. A couple things. One, I mean, I guess they could still try to capture Riker because Riker would still be a captain and he would still have the secret command codes that they're trying to get out of him. Okay. So let's say they capture Riker instead of Picard and now Riker's being tortured. Here's what I think would be different. In Chain of Command, the reason why they got away with it, or the reason why they saved the day and were able to get Picard back is because Captain Jellicoe, who had taken over the Enterprise during this secret mission, went to Riker with hat in hand and asked him to fly a shuttle in such a way to plant a bunch of mines underneath all of these Cardassian ships. And then, as proof of concept, he blew up a few of the mines and threatened them, saying, if you don't get Picard back, we will blow up your whole fleet. And they were like, fine, you can have him back. Because at first they were like, we don't have Picard. We don't know who you're talking about. I never heard of him. But then after this threat, he's like, all right, fine, you can have Picard back. So Picard comes back. Jellicoe's like, I stand relieved. It was an honor working with you. He pieces out. Picard takes over the ship. The only reason he was able to pull that off is because Riker's the best pilot in Starfleet, apparently. So he was the only one who could really get that job done. Now, if Riker were captain, who would be there to get the job done? Who would be planting these mines? No one, or someone not as skilled. I don't think this would have been pulled off as well. And I think they would have lost Captain Riker, and the Enterprise would end up being captained by Jellicoe forever, which would be the end of me watching this show. Because while I think Jellicoe is perfect for this scenario, he was not a captain to enjoy watching, to want to work with, to want to serve under. I think there would be a mass exodus of the crew and a complete restructuring of what's going on in the Enterprise. I don't know if it would still be the flagship going on the most dangerous missions. But spoiler alert, we do see Jellicoe in Prodigy, and he is an admiral at that point. So apparently he's still doing good stuff in Starfleet. So that's great. So he would have been fine as the captain of the Enterprise. He would have done, whatever Jellicoe does. He would have kept going with his special skills to do those kinds of missions. He just wouldn't have done the kinds of missions that Picard would do, and he certainly wouldn't have done the kinds of missions that Riker would do. Let me know your thoughts in the chat, and we'll go to the next episode on the list. Nadia says, man, photosynthetic aliens probably have amazingly slender, lithe bodies. Maybe, or maybe they have like big, like big petals or big leaves. Maybe they've got like big, long parts of their body that are best at soaking up the sun. Yeah, I think anyway we slice it, they're probably going to be pretty slender, and probably pretty strong too, which would be so interesting, Nadia. I want to see the show. Like, I want to see it. If you haven't watched Prodigy season 2, there is a character who is a Medusan, so like a ball of energy, and it ends up getting they end up getting a physical body at one point, and the physical body is so beautiful. It's just gorgeous. The whole show is freaking gorgeous, but it's beautiful. And when you said photosynthetic being, I immediately thought of that body. That body is not photosynthetic, but it could be. Like, it's kind of got these cool like gold markings and all this stuff. But yeah, if the skin was like able to use sunlight to make energy, that'd be so dope. I would totally watch that. Nadia says about the episode Chain of Command, no, stop torturing my husband. Captain Picard's her husband. PS2 Chipper says, that was a great episode. I respect Captain Jellicoe. I also respect Captain Jellicoe. Don't like him though, but I do respect him. Riker would do it himself. So Riker would fly himself out of, but he'd be tortured. I'm not. Okay. Justin says, before that episode, I don't recall Riker ever having that specialty. They say it in the pilot episode, in Encounter at Farpoint, when it's so silly. So when Riker and Picard meet each other for the first time, are they docking with the saucer section? I think they're docking with the saucer section, or they're coming into a space dock. I don't remember which one. But Picard is like, Riker, why don't you take the helm since you're the best pilot in Starfleet? Let me see what you got. And he's like, okay. And he sits at the comm and he like does it and flies the ship in. And it's just like, okay, but you also have a pilot here. I don't know. And then later on, Justin, this is ridiculous. Later on, there's this episode. What's the name of this episode? Okay, there's this episode where they're trapped in this part of space where there's like no warp fields because it's this old like a landmine, like a space landmine, except for instead of blowing up, it gets rid of your warp drive. So then your ship is like stranded and then you'll like die. So in that episode, they figure out a way to use impulse power to like slowly get them through. And it's an asteroid field. So it's like, you got to be really careful to not run into all these asteroids and stuff. So they use impulse drive to like get up enough energy to kind of slingshot themselves through. And they have to carefully pilot through all these asteroids to get to the other side. And for some reason in that episode, Picard's like, I need to fly this. That's right, because I'm such a great pilot. And you're like, what? Since when is Picard a great pilot? didn't you hire Riker specifically because he's like one of the best pilots in Starfleet? And that was not your super special skill set until this moment, and never again shall we talk about it. So I don't know what happened in the filming of that episode, but that didn't make sense. And that always makes me go a little bit. Always makes me look a little sideways. PS2 Chipper says, I thought you meant if Riker was captain instead of Jellicoe. Oh, no, I meant if Riker was captain instead of Picard. If there was no Picard. Yeah, if Riker was captain instead of Jellicoe, like, the whole thing would have been different. Like, if Picard was still captured and then Riker was in charge, I think they probably would have done the same thing. They just wouldn't have been jerks about it, like the way Jellicoe was with the crew. But yeah, Riker would have done whatever it takes to get Picard back. Absolutely. Okay, so PS2 Chipper says it was the saucer section. So he was like, take us in, and then the saucers like connected. And I believe we only saw the saucer section separation thing happen, what, like 3 times in all of TNG, I think? We didn't see it enough times. That's another thing that I never got tired of. We only saw it a few times, but every time it was like, ooh, I could stand to see that a little bit more. Very cool. Nadia says, I think Tom Paris is a better pilot than Riker. Prove me wrong. How can we prove you wrong? You're probably right, especially since Tom Paris is the pilot and Riker is the first officer. He doesn't even push the buttons when he sits on the bridge. He just kind of observes, you know? He supervises, he manages the situation. But at least you see Paris like pushing some buttons and stuff like that. Hold on. PS2 Chipper says they were trying to hype up the difference between the Enterprise D and the Enterprise A by showing off the saucer separation, which was very cool. Justin says Picard in the Binar episode took the helm like a boss and says you're in good hands. Did Picard take the helm in the episode? What was that? 100101? I think is what that episode's called. If Picard took the helm in that episode, Justin, to your point, once again, why? Why did Picard take it? Because Riker was there too. Granted, he was distracted by Minuet, but whatever. He was there too, and he was supposed to be the pilot. So who knows what is going on? PS2 Chipper says, yes, 3 times, but they talked about it more times than that. Okay. And also the battle bridge was hardly used as well. I think there was an engineering bridge that was used once. Yeah, they have a couple cool like sets, like bridge sets that we don't see too many times. They also have a couple cool like lab sets we only see a few times. There was a set from what was the name of this episode? It was the episode with Dr. Stubbs, and he has this egg that he's trying to throw into this star that is dying, I think, or something. And it's the one where like the little nanites become sentient and stuff. Anyways, they have this really cool lab room that I think we only see like twice in the show. And it's so cool. I don't know what happened to that set. Crazy Normie YT says Paris had way more experience by season 7 of Voyager. Yeah, we really don't even know how much, at least I don't know how much piloting experience Riker had before he came to be first officer on the Enterprise. So I don't know, Nadia. I don't think anybody's proven you wrong so far that Tom Paris is a better pilot. I love that part. JLP cracks his knuckles before taking the helm. So funny. Really? He cracks his knuckles? Oh my goodness. That's funny. Okay, so Nadia says, I think Picard took the helm just for funsies because sometimes you just got to fly your ship. Maybe that's just what it's like sometimes. PS2 Chipper says, Picard says he is responsible for the safety of the crew and blah, blah, blah. I'll do it myself. Then what is the point of being a captain who delegates if you got to do it all yourself? Justin says that part is epic, and it definitely proves Jean-Luc's prowess at the controls. Also, Booby Trap. That's what it was called. Yes, the name of the episode was Booby Trap. Thank you. I totally blanked on that. Ooh, but what about Ortegas? She flies the ship. That is the one thing we know is that she flies the ship. So many great pilots. Yeah, on Best of Trek, Worst of Trek, there was a whole episode on like best roles. And one was, so it was like best captain, best medical officer, best pilot, things like that. That's a fun episode that I definitely recommend. Best of Trek, Worst of Trek is another channel on YouTube. Okay, let's check the next episode that I think would be interestingly different if Riker was the captain. Season 7, Episode 12, The Pegasus. Riker confronts his past when the Enterprise is tasked with recovering the long-lost ship Pegasus. After finding the ship half-phased into an asteroid near Romulan space, Riker finally confronts Captain Pressman about continuing to develop illegal cloaking technology. Picard exposes the truth to the Romulans, and trust between him and Riker is restored. So let's pretend like Riker's captain in this scenario. Pressman comes on, he's the admiral, and he orders Riker to do all this stuff. Of course, Riker would do it just like Riker did it. Now, technically, Picard was the captain, so Picard was taking the actions, but I think Riker would have taken the same actions regardless. So they still find themselves in this pickle. In the end, Riker comes clean to Picard and is like, Pressman was doing these illegal activities, and I went along with him. Their illegal activity was that Pressman was helping to develop cloaking technology. And because of the Treaty of Algernon, the Federation had agreed to never develop cloaking technology. And I still don't know why. That seems like a terrible decision because the Romulans have cloaking technology, the Klingons have cloaking technology, the Cardassians have cloaking technology, I think. I'm not sure about that one, but I think so. And why can't the Federation have it? Especially if the Klingons are allies, like we can share technology. So whatever. They said they would never do it. Pressman was like, we need to have this technology. So he was doing it in secret. And that's what the problem was. He was working with the highest levels of government, some like spy division, to develop this secret technology. Now, here's the problem. If the Federation has said that they will never create any cloaking technology, but they secretly create cloaking technology, who exactly is going to be able to use this technology? Let's say they figured out, which I don't know how hard it could be because a bunch of other people have done it. So I feel like at some point the Daystrom Institute is going to figure it out, right? Somebody's going to figure it out. But who can actually use this technology? Because you can never uncloak in front of anyone who might figure you out, even other people in the Federation, unless it's people who are in the know and know the big secret. So you could, I guess, use this for clandestine spying, but so could all the other people. So I don't really know. In any case, he finally comes clean and Picard is like, all right, we're no longer listening to you. We are going to just, tell you to shut up. And we're going to get out of the situation. We're going to show the Romulans that we do have cloaking technology. We're going to have to talk about this with our government. It's going to have to all come out. It's going to be a whole international incident. And that's the right thing to do. Now, if Riker were captain, I think this would be different because the only reason this worked is because Riker had a higher authority to kind of lend credence to what he was saying, right? He had Picard to make the final call. But if Riker were captain, Riker would be the one making the final call. So who would he appeal to, right? Like the admiral's above him and then it's just him. So I think it could have gone a couple different ways. One, it could have gone similarly where he's just like, you know what, Pressman, I'm done. I'm done with all this. And I'm going to tell the crew the truth. And he just spills the truth to the entire bridge crew and everyone's all appalled. And then he's like, and I'm going to tell the Romulans. So that could have happened. I guess he could have also just gone along with it and said nothing because there'd be nobody to like call his bluff. There's no one he has to answer to. I mean, obviously his friends, but there's no one who he has to answer to. What I really think though, is I think this would have gone down similarly. I think he would have spilled the beans. I think they would have, because they had to get out of the asteroid, right? I think they would have gotten out of the asteroid. He may or may not have uncloaked because he didn't need to. He could have stayed cloaked, snuck away from the Romulan ship, and then uncloaked back on the Federation side of the neutral zone. No one would have been the wiser. So he could have done that. But in any case, at some point, someone is telling on him. Someone is going to tell Starfleet what happened, right? Because Pressman has to come to justice, but so does Riker. At the end of this episode, Riker's sitting in the brig. Picard comes to talk to him. He says, there's going to be an investigation. There's going to be a mark on your record. You're going to have some tough times ahead, but I'm going to stand with you the whole way. And they kind of like walk out of the brig as friends. Now, if Riker was the captain himself, he couldn't have that interaction, right? With himself. So I think he would have been, at the very least, temporarily removed from being captain while the investigation is happening. Then you can't really say once he's cleared, I guess, because he was complicit, but he was also like a junior officer. So there's mitigating circumstances and he didn't want a mutiny, which he would have also been guilty of had he done that. So, he would have also been dead, but you know what I mean? I think he would have been cleared of all the charges and then he could have been put back in charge of the Enterprise, or maybe they would have reassigned him to some other ship with lesser responsibilities until they could trust him again. However, we're kind of back to the situation that we were in with Time's Arrow. I think the second he was removed, Shelby would have been like, woo, Captain Shelby, peace out, yo. And I think she would have just taken the ship and run with it. Those are my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and then we'll go to the next episode on the list. Okay, let's see. You are so welcome, Best of Trek, Worst of Trek. Didn't know you're here, buddy. PS2 Chipper says Captain Pressman or Admiral Pressman is the opposite of Captain Jellicoe. Do you think so? I think they're different. I think they both kind of suck though. And I think, you know, Captain Jellicoe is just he's mean. Like, he's just mean. He doesn't strike me as empathetic. He doesn't seem to really care about his crew. He just wants them to do tasks. And that's fine, because in some jobs, you do just need to do tasks. We don't need to be friends. We don't need to sing Kumbaya. We don't need to hang out at 10 Forward, right? You just need to do tasks. But I think there's a way you can do it and still respect the people who work for you. And I think giving respect is how you get respect. But I don't think Captain Jellicoe was very respectful. And that's why I feel like he didn't have anybody's trust. Captain Pressman, when he was the captain, was doing illegal things, and his crew didn't seem to have a choice. Like, follow what the captain is telling you to do, or mutiny, and then go to prison for treason, you know, or like tell on the captain. I mean, they were just put in a really hard position, which kind of also, now that I'm saying this out loud, doesn't make sense. Why was he out messing with this ship, messing with cloaking technology with a ship full of people who are not on board with it? Why wasn't he instead in some, you know, isolated place with a handful of people who all agreed to be a part of this? It doesn't make sense that he would have all these people who just are not in the know working under him. So of course they were conflicted, because they were like, this is wrong. We can't go against that treaty, you know? And so then there was this big divide. So I do find Pressman much more likable though. I mean, he's still brash, but just, he has a personality, right? And he cares about things. Whereas Jellicoe, I wasn't really sure what he cared about. So I would say they're different. I don't know if they're opposite. And I definitely wouldn't want to work for either of them, because I don't trust either of them. Nadia says, I want to see that sequence in that video when Riker is yelling at Pressman without audio again. That was funny. Where he's just yelling, right? And I don't even know what he's saying, but he's probably saying like, oh, you know what he was saying? Because Pressman was like, Riker goes, this has gone too far. I have to say something. And Pressman's like, you better not. You're like, you know, under interdiction or whatever. He's not allowed to say anything. He signed some NDA. And he's like, that was before I knew this was still here, and you're going to start those experiments over again, and I can't let it happen. And Pressman's like, what happened to that young baby-faced ensign who picked up a phaser and protected his captain? And Riker's like, that was before I knew what you were doing was wrong, and I was so fresh and naive, I didn't know any better. And if we had to do again, I would point the phaser at you. And Pressman's like, oh, I mean, it's just a whole thing. It's a moment. If you have not seen Pegasus recently, watch it. Amazing. Love it. Crazy Normie YT says, it's a bad treaty, Will. I agree with Pressman. Unfortunately, the treaty was signed. Pressman, I don't know what to tell you. Like, it was signed. I think it was a bad treaty also, but you can't go through, like, do things on the back end and be all secretive and think you're going to get away with it forever. Like, at some point, something's going to come out. And then what are you going to say? Because, you know, I have a friend who's a lawyer, and she always says, ignorance of the law is not a defense. So you can't be like, well, I didn't know it was illegal to do that. I mean, you could say that, but you will still be punished according to the law, even if you didn't know. And I feel like this is that situation where he did know. Okay, thank you, PS2 Chipper. Cardassians do not have cloaking technology. Their ships are basic technologically. Good to know. Okay, because I couldn't remember if they did or didn't. But I also feel like the Romulan ships and the Klingon ships look pretty similar to me. But you know what? I'm not really good with ships. If you find opinions no one cares about on YouTube, on his channel, he has a tattoo, which is epic, of just like all these different ships. They're different classes of Starfleet vessels. I don't think there's any, and Best of Trek, Worst of Trek, let me know if I'm wrong, or Windgrace. I don't think there's any like warbirds or anything. I think it's just Federation ships. But in any case, I remember talking to him and saying, I can't tell the difference between all the ships at all. But I knew some of them could cloak, and I know Federations can't. Okay, Nadia says the Daystroms would have been a good name for the photosynthetic aliens who live in the Dyson sphere. Man, I'm making up a whole new story here, people. Let us know what happens to those aliens. Let us know how they left the Dyson sphere and where they went from there. Did they go the way of the progenitors and just disappear, or like what happened to the Daystroms? Windgrace says only the Cisco's gets to cloak. I know. So Windgrace, like I'm still catching up on Deep Space Nine. And so I watched the video. I watched the episodes out of order because I was reviewing episodes for the podcast Trek, Marry, Kill. So we were reviewing some of the best Deep Space Nine episodes. And in one of the episodes, I saw the little Defiant cloak. And I was like, what just happened? You have to what is going on? And so the host of that show, Brian, was explaining to me how they get cloaking technology. And I was like, what? Finally, like somebody in the Federation gets a freaking cloaked ship. Okay, Best of Trek, Worst of Trek says, I agree about how Riker would have handled this as captain. Writing a what if Riker was captain script as we speak. You know what? Honestly, Best of Trek, Worst of Trek. So Dustin did this video that was what if Voyager was never stuck in the Delta Quadrant? Like, what would have happened in the Star Trek universe? This video is epic. Go and check out the Best of Trek, Worst of Trek channel on YouTube to watch this video. It's if you like Voyager at all, because it hits on all of the knock-on effects. And I did think about you for this video because I was like, man, Dustin would go so deep, and I'm not going to do that. But I know you're good at that. So if you do this video, it's going to be sick. It's going to be so good. PS2 Chipper says Starfleet does not build warships. So this is something that Picard said, right? And which episode did he say this in? I don't remember, but in one episode he goes, Starfleet is not the military. We're scientists. We're not the military. And, me and my co-host for the TG podcast, we were kind of like, should I tell him or do you want to? They are the military. This is the flagship. This is the first ship they sent into battle. Yes, they also explore. But if they were just exploratory vessels, they wouldn't have so many torpedoes, right? They are absolutely built for violence. That is not why they were built. They were not built to go out and attack things and like conquer things. They were built to go and explore. And one could argue that their armaments are just for self-protection. However, weapons are weapons, and they have a whole bunch of weapons to, defend themselves, others, what have you. So what defines a warship, I guess, is my question. Is it a warship because it's been designed exclusively and only for war? Like I would say the Klingon ships, that's kind of their function. Or is it a warship because it can engage in battles? I don't know. Nadia says, except for the Defiant class. PS2 Chipper says, yes, Romulans and Klingons had technology exchange. Romulans got ships and Klingons got cloaks. Really? Is that why? Huh. That is interesting. Ben Sisko must have had some Genghis Khan ancestry. PS2 Chipper says, that was funny, crazy normie. PS2 Chipper says, after the original Defiant was destroyed, they lost the cloak, so it made sense in Picard Season 3 that they used the Klingon Bird of Prey instead of Sao Paulo's Defiant ship. Was his ship Defiant class? Get out of freaking town. And also, the Defiant got destroyed. So many sad things happen in Deep Space Nine. That's why I'm a little nervous. A little nervous about watching to the end because I know there's some like moments. However, I've heard so many people say it's the best one. Now everyone's saying Strange New Worlds is like the best new one, but of the old ones, so many people I know are like Deep Space Nine is the best one. And I never got into it. So looking forward to it. Oh, Best of Trek, Worst of Trek. You got another shout out. Loved that video. Windgrace says, I'm anxiously awaiting Janeway as commander of DS9 sequel. That would be DS9. Can DS9 self-destruct? If not, then I think DS9 has a really good chance. So Gene Roddenberry said, it's not a space navy. And Best of Trek, Worst of Trek says, okay, Gene. Which I also say, okay, Gene. It's not a space navy. Nope, we just use bosun whistles because, we're in space as a naval fleet and spaceships. Windgrace says weapons of mass exploration. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Weapons for exploration. PS2 Chipper says, you're right about Starfleet. There was a huge ordeal between Roddenberry and the new producer over the nature of Starfleet. And I think it's fine. I think it's totally fine that it's a military organization. I just think it's silly to be like, it's not military. We're just scientists who like to blow stuff up when we need to. It's like, you could be both. PS2 Chipper says Deep Space Nine is the best. Oh, and look at that. Nadia says, yes, Deep Space Nine has an auto destruct, which I did not know. Why would a space station have an auto destruct? Why does anything have an auto destruct? Anyways, here's the next episode that I think would be quite different if Riker were captain. Season 6, Episode 20, The Chase. Picard joins a race to solve an ancient genetic puzzle left by a precursor species. Facing competition and interference from Klingons, Romulans, and the Cardassians, the Enterprise discovers that humanoid species share a common origin. This news is met with a variety of responses, from indignation to awe. So this episode, not my favorite, but the message of it is kind of cute, right? It's like, we are all one. We're all from the progenitor species. Okay, great. Now, the way this episode starts is that Captain Picard's old professor from the academy, who is an archaeologist, comes to him and is like, I'm onto something huge. It's like the biggest find of the century. You got to be in on this. No one's ever seen anything this big. And Picard's like, no. You got to go on your own. So he goes on his own and is like immediately killed. And now Picard's like, why was he killed? What was he exploring? And so he gets caught up in the adventure himself. And you come to find out, like in this little clip said, that the progenitor species just wanted everybody to know that they are all one. How lovely. Now, if Riker were captain, none of this would happen because Riker would not have had that professor. He wouldn't have taken that class. This person wouldn't have come to the ship with any requests. They never would have been a part of the chase. It would have just happened without them amongst the Klingons and Romulans and what have you. They would have discovered that we are all one and all from the progenitor race. They would have, like they did in this episode, not cared and gone back to their own lives, except for, I think, was it the Romulan captain or the Cardassian captain? Maybe it's the Cardassian captain who calmed over to Picard and was like, maybe we're more alike than we think. So like one person was moved, and of course Picard was deeply moved, but everybody else was like, man, I thought this was something special, and they just went back to their own lives. Had Riker been captain, none of this would have happened. None of this would have happened. They would have still figured out that we're all one. The Federation would not have known, but it wouldn't have changed anything. But the bigger knock-on effect is that we would not have the entire last season of Discovery, which was based on this episode. So all of season 5 of Discovery would be different. Would it be better? Would it be worse? I don't know. But if they were going to base it on an episode, they'd have to base it on a totally different episode from TNG because this one would not exist. So that is what I think would have changed with this episode. I'm going to check the chat and then we'll go to the next episode that I think would be a little different if Riker were captain. Windgrace says, I was disappointed when my friend in the Navy informed me that their ships do not have self-destruct. PS2 Chipper says, no, they have to manually scuttle their ships. So they can't. So what you're saying, PS2 Chipper, is they can't just be like 11304556 go and the ship just blows up. They have to actually like put effort into destroying their ship so that they meant to. It couldn't accidentally be triggered, or Data couldn't just say something out of his mouth and cause it to happen. That's good to know. Okay, PS2 Chipper said it was the Cardassian captain. Okay, because I couldn't remember who, but I know it was somebody who was like, maybe there's hope for us. And Picard was like, maybe. And then there wasn't hope. Nadia says DS9's auto-destruct feature in the awesome season 3, episode 7, episode Civil Defense is one of my frequent rewatches. So I'm not laughing at that. I'm laughing at this next thing. But yes, okay, season 3, great. Because when I went to start rewatching DS9, I'd forgotten everything I watched before. So I was watching like that Vosh episode, Q-less. And I was like, but what about, and I just was forgetting a bunch of stuff. So basically I need to go back. I need to go back to first episode, to Emissary Part 1 and start over. But I heard that either season 3 or season 4 is where it starts getting really good. In any case, I'm excited to like watch one of your favorite rewatches. Yeah, so what I was laughing at was Best of Trek, Worst of Trek said the code could be 0000 destruct. Like that's the code that comes with every Starfleet vessel by default, and the captain has to reset it. Or if you guys saw Spaceballs, the code was 1234. And they were like, that's an idiot's code. So funny. PS2 Chipper says they have to use a plasma cutter to cut a hole in the hull or just set off a bomb. I think you're talking about scuttling an actual like submarine or something like that. You can't just like say destruct 0000 destruct and then it destructs, which is good because we don't want that. We don't want anything to be so easily destroyed. It's kind of silly. Best of Trek, worst of Trek says, that is a combination to my luggage. Exactly. I was thinking that same next line where he was like, that's the kind of code that an idiot puts on his luggage. And the captain's like, that's the code to my luggage. And then after he walks out, he goes, change the combination on my luggage. Yes, Spaceballs is the best. When we do a watch party, we need to put Spaceballs in there somewhere. Windgray says, Emissary would be different without Picard. I wonder how that would play out. I think so too, but maybe not. Because if we did not have Picard, right, if Locutus's cube was destroyed before it left the area of the Enterprise, it never got to Earth. It was never at Wolf 359. It never decimated the fleet. None of that happened. Ben would not have lost his wife, right? Jennifer Sisko would still be alive. And the three of them could still go to Deep Space Nine to serve. They would just be in a different emotional state with a different family dynamic. So, I don't know. Yes, heck yes, Spaceballs watch party. I know it's been so long. Tuvok is in that movie. It's been so long since I've seen that movie and I freaking love it and I would love to watch it with you guys. Okay, here's the next episode that I think would be different if Riker were captain. Season 7, Episode 15, Lower Decks. In this episode, we get a glimpse into the junior officers aboard the Enterprise. Yes, this is the inspiration for the animated series Lower Decks. While learning about their ambitions, friendships, and struggles, Ensign Sito is sent on a dangerous covert mission into Cardassian space. While awaiting her return, they discover that her ship was destroyed and that she was killed, leaving her colleagues shocked and heartbroken. This episode is excellent. This is a really good episode. And it's kind of a hidden gem because it's not about the bridge crew. It's about these random officers, except for Nurse Ogawa, who we've seen a bunch of times, and we love her. It's about a bunch of officers we haven't really seen before. So somehow they make us care about these officers in this one-off episode where you really feel like you know them and you kind of get where they're coming from and you get what they care about. And it just is very relatable. I don't know. This episode's special. I think if they did episodes like this all the time, it would get old really fast. They tried to do an episode just like this on Voyager. And I think that episode was also good. It was totally different because they couldn't just do this again, right? But they wanted to do one where it was like the lower deck crew. And their spin on it was they're trapped in the Delta Quadrant. Normally, these particular officers would wash out of Starfleet and they would go get some other job. But because they're trapped in the Delta Quadrant, they have to work doing these jobs. And they're just like doing the best they can, which is not great. So that was kind of their angle. And they get into this like adventure or whatever. So I think doing it once in a 7-season show is probably enough. But here's what I think would have been different. The reason why Ensign Sito was even on the ship was because of what happened back in the first duty. Picard was instrumental in convincing Wesley to tell the truth, which means that he and Ensign Sito and the other person whose name I don't know had to repeat that year of school, right? And Locarno was expelled. So they had to repeat that year. So what Picard tells her in this episode is like, the reason I picked you, I hand selected you to serve on my ship because I was pretty sure nobody else in Starfleet would even give you a chance with your record. And I wanted to make sure you had a chance to prove yourself. And you did. Right? Which I just think is beautiful. Like that's probably my favorite part of this episode because it always makes me cry at the end. But that part where he's just like, I wanted to give you a chance because he seems like a total jerk to her at first. And you're just like, wow, Picard's the worst. And then you're like, wow, this was all part of his plan to see if she had what it takes to be an officer because he was going to like mentor her and let her grow on the ship full of like super amazing people. I mean, it's a flagship. Everybody's supposed to be amazing, right? So anyways, then when there's this opportunity to send this like a double agent, Cardassian back over the neutral zone, Sito was supposed to be an escaping prisoner. So this was like his cover for why he's coming back. It's like, oh, I'm bringing this prisoner and, I was running from the Enterprise, whatever his story was. And then she was going to lead credence to that. And then he was going to let her escape and he was going to transport himself off to some Cardassian ship. And then she was going to fly back over the neutral zone, and the Enterprise is going to pick her up. So this is the plan. However, when she tried to escape, the Cardassian ship opened fire and blew her up, which is so sad. Now, had Riker been captain, none of this would have happened, because had Riker been captain, I don't think he would have convinced Wesley to tell the truth. So I don't think any of them would have been harmed at all. Like, I don't think any of their records would have been stained. However, let's say that it was, or let's say that Riker knew the truth, even though he couldn't prove it, or he couldn't convince Riker to prove it. Maybe he would have still given Ensign Cito a chance, but I don't think so. Even if he was or was not able to convince Wesley to come forward with the truth, I do not think he would have gone out of his way to hand select Ensign Cito to put her on the ship to give her a chance to prove herself in Starfleet. That just doesn't seem like a Riker thing to do. And I'm not saying Riker's a bad person. This just doesn't seem like this would be on his radar of like things he needs to make a priority. Do you know what I mean? So in that case, we would not have had Ensign Cito for this whole scenario. So I think it would have been Ensign Rowe in that shuttle. And I think she would have been blown up. That is my prediction. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and then we'll go to the next episode that I think would have been a little bit different if Riker were captain. PS2 Chipper says, it would be awesome to see Riker's lower deck years. Yeah, we're assuming that those lower deck years were not with him serving on Admiral Pressman's ship, because that'd be awkward. Nadia says, I would love Riker or JLP an origin story or like a lower decks series. Yeah, I feel like we got one Picard series. I don't think we're going to get another one, but it'd be interesting. Like PS2 Chipper says, JLP before he got stabbed in the heart. He got stabbed in the heart right after graduating the academy, before going on to his first mission. So that would have been like, you know what? You guys are going to get your wish because we're getting the academy. So that's what that would have been. If it was before, it would be all about the academy. We're going to get that show, but it's happening in the future. So it's not going to be with Picard or Riker, but we will get to see some academy shenanigans. And I believe that show is coming out this year, last time I checked. What time this year? I don't know. But at some point, that show will be a thing and we can all watch it together. Best of Trek, Worst of Trek says, Cadet Jean Hajar was the other surviving member of the Nova Squadron. Thanks for that. I did not remember that person's name at all. Like, I remember what he looks like, but I'm like, It was a guy, right? Wasn't it oh, wait. Hold on. Was it a guy? Was it a guy, or am I confusing him with one of the other council members, one of the other judges? I don't even know. Okay, so Best of Trek, Worst of Trek says the Academy just wrapped filming. So when it will be available for us to view, we will know. We shall find out. Here's the next episode that I think would be different if Riker were captain. Season 7, Episode 19, Genesis. The crew of the Enterprise starts to devolve into primitive forms. Picard and Data, unaffected by the changes, work to reverse the mutation while running for their lives from what's left of the crew. Data saves the day in time for Picard to avoid being eaten by Worf. So, this episode's another one of my all-time favorite episodes where everyone devolves to these different species and different creatures, which, by the way, I'm doing a whole video on this sort of thing, and we can really like dig into the science of it. But anyways, love this episode. In this episode, Picard and Data are like on an away mission, and they come back to the ship, and the ship is drifting in space, which is kind of fun to watch because if you think about it, space has no up or down, but you can clearly see the ship is kind of like tilted at an angle. There are no angles in space. Like it's a three-dimensional, whatever. So the ship is drifting. They get onto the ship and then they're just hearing like growls and like screams and stuff in the ship. And the lights are all flickering and off and stuff's all damaged and panels have big scratch marks across them. And they're like, what is going on? And they're walking to the ship and they find this giant snake skin with like a Starfleet uniform connected to it. They're just like, what the heck is going on? So as they kind of figure out what situation has happened, that some virus has gone through the ship and is mutating everybody, Picard also gets infected. Data is immune because he is an android, and so there's no DNA to mutate. Picard devolves to a small mammal. I think they said what, like a marmoset or something like that, like a little mouse. And so or like a lemur, I think that's what it was, maybe like a lemur. So some very small hunted mammal. And you see it start to affect him. Like halfway through the episode, he starts getting all paranoid. He starts feeling like things are watching him. And he ends up coming up with this brilliant plan to take Counselor Troy's pheromones and to spray it throughout the ship to try to convince devolved Worf to chase it as his potential mate and move him away from sickbay where Data is working on a cure for this virus. And he's going to like put the cure through the whole ship through their air ducts or something. There's a lot of science in this that the science doesn't science, you know what I mean? But in any case, so he gets the pheromones from Troy and he's like spraying it. And so Worf like follows him, and then Data has time to find a cure. And then Picard ends up electrocuting Worf. Doesn't die though, no worries. But he electrocutes him and he's like saved just before Worf eats him. And then just in time, Data comes up with a solution and saves everybody who's, you know, still alive and hasn't been eaten. Here's what I think would be very different. In this episode, Riker devolves into a Neanderthal, some kind of hominid, some kind of ancient man who does not have language and is very violent and aggressive and not too bright. So I think had Riker been captain, okay, and he came back on the ship with Data from the away mission, and they started going through the ship and figuring everything out, this would have gone very differently, because once he started to de-evolve, he would have gotten dumber and dumber, which is what we see in the beginning of this episode when people are talking to him and he's like, what? Huh? Like he doesn't know what's going on. He's not understanding. Like he starts going like, what does that mean? You should do it. I don't know. You decide. Like his brain starts shutting down. So if that was happening here, he would not have the presence of mind to take Counselor Troy's pheromones and spray them throughout the ship and run for his life and go through the Jeffries tubes and climb through the back. He would not have been able to do all that. So I think if Riker were captain in this situation, everybody on the ship would have gotten eaten by Worf and Data would have been torn to pieces. Rest in peace, Enterprise D. Those are my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts in the chat, and then we'll go to the next episode that I think would be a little bit different if Riker were captain. Thank you, Best of Trek, Worst of Trek. Okay, the other person in the team from Nova Squadron was a woman whose name was Jean, who I totally didn't remember. And the guy I'm thinking about was the other councilman who was a Vulcan. So I was like, isn't it a guy who was a Vulcan? But no, that was like the other judge or whatever, or dean, or whoever those people were who were presiding over the tribunal. PS2 Chipper says, Riker the caveman. Bye, Nadia. See you next time. Wingrace says, some sort of emergency hologram doctor would be useful in this sort of situation. I completely agree. Some sort of holographic doctor would be extremely helpful in this particular situation to keep everyone from being eaten. Okay, here's the next episode, the last episode that I think would be a little bit different if Riker were captain. Season 7, episodes 25 and 26, All Good Things. Picard is transported across 3 timelines by Q to solve the mystery of a temporal anomaly threatening humanity's existence. Piecing together clues from the past, present, and future, Picard discovers that his decisions are key to solving this crisis. Turns out, Q can actually be helpful sometimes. Also, Picard joins the bridge crew poker game for the first time. This is a really good series finale, and the poker game is like chef's kiss perfection. But if Riker were captain, here's what I think would have happened. So in this episode, Picard is jumping through 3 different timelines, and he is looking at this anomaly in all 3 timelines, and he shoots this, I want to say a tachyon beam, but I honestly don't remember what it was. He shoots some kind of pulse into space, but he's shooting it into space at these 3 different times, and it creates this anomaly that is almost invisible in the future, but gets bigger and bigger and bigger through the past. And it sends some kind of like time wave through the past to the point where back with the primordial ooze on Earth, this anomaly is getting so huge that it prevents life from forming on Earth. And it actually prevents all life from forming in the entire Alpha Quadrant. So Q takes Picard back to that moment to say, here's what's happened. And so then he's like, what are you going to do about it? And then Picard goes back and is like, oh, I know the secret. We got to put the Enterprise inside the rift in order to technobabble here. And then we're going to stabilize and break the chain and whatever. They save the day. The only reason this was effective is because Q is obsessed with Picard. Picard is his favorite plaything. And so he allowed Picard to save the day. He also sort of like put Picard in the situation in the first place, but whatever. He allowed Picard to save the day by allowing him to time jump and sending him to the past to give him a super secret clue, and then helping him to keep his mind, or actually, I guess Q didn't help him keep his mind, but he was able to keep his mind straight through all these different phases in order to save the day. And Q congratulates him at the end and says, there's hope for humanity yet, because you were able to keep your mind straight and think in 3 time dimensions at the same time, which is what Q can do. We can all, be in different times and think totally straight. So humanity has some hope. And the trial never ends or whatever. If Riker were captain, I don't think Q would have gone through the trouble. So if Riker were captain and he were somehow time jumping and caused this anomaly, I don't think Q would have given him this super secret hint. I think he would have just been like, sucks to be you. And I think life as we know it would have never existed, would have no Earth, everything would be destroyed. We'd have no life in the Alpha Quadrant, no Federation, and no Star Trek The Next Generation. Rest in peace, everyone. That's what I think would have happened. Let me know what you think in the comments. Also, here are a few other things that I think would be a little bit different. These are just some other effects of Riker being captain. One, in the episode Devil's Due, where Ardra comes to take over that planet and she claims to be the devil, she was very big on trying to seduce Picard, and Picard was not having it. Picard knew she was a con artist and held his ground and refused all her advances and proved her to be a liar and captured her ship. Now, I think Riker could have proved all that as well because he's got a pretty smart team working with him, but he totally would have hooked up with Ardra, which means in the episode Cupid, if Q were to bother with the ship for any reason, there'd be no Vosh, right? Because there'd be no Picard. But I think instead of Vosh, it'd be Ardra. And so Riker would have to fight for Ardra, which I don't think he would, because why? And also Ardra can definitely fight for herself. And if it all happened the same way and Q gallivanted off to the Gamma Quadrant with Ardra, I think that'd be great because I think the two of them are kind of made for each other. If Riker were an inner light instead of Picard, he would come out of that experience knowing how to play the trombone and the Resican flute. I think that would have been the difference. I don't think it would have had any effect on Voyager or Enterprise or any of the other shows except for Picard, because if Picard died as Locutus, we would not have Picard. Instead, our reboot would be Riker. And I actually think it would be great. So all this time I've been saying, what are the terrible things that could have happened because Picard was no longer captain after the Borg incident? But honestly, I don't think any of those things would happen. I think Riker would have been just as great of a captain as Picard. I think he would have done things differently. I don't think he would have been called in for any of the ambassadorial missions, any of those diplomatic missions, like in Unification, where Picard was called in to, work with Spock secretly on the Romulan Vulcan, reunion situation. Riker wouldn't have been called in for that. Or in the episode where, I'm blanking on the name of it, but on the episode where Kimpek, the leader of the Klingon High Council, has been poisoned and he's dying, and he makes Picard the arbiter of accession to decide who's going to be the next ruler of the Klingon High Council. I don't think Riker would have done that. He could have, because he has a cool relationship with Klingons, but I don't think they would have called in Riker to do that. However, I think it would have been fine. So even though I've been kind of playful on this whole live stream talking about all the disastrous things that would happen if Riker were captain, honestly, I think it would have been just fine. He would have just done things his own way. There would have been much fewer episodes about diplomacy. There would have been much fewer episodes about archaeology. There would have been many more episodes of hooking up, but I think it would have been fine. I think he could have come to the same solutions that Picard and team came up with, because it was never just Picard. It was always the team working together. So I did have some thoughts about how the movie First Contact would have been super different, because the Borg going back, and, Picard had that whole thing of like, you made me a Borg. But then I'm like, well, Riker could have also been like, you killed my friend, you killed my captain. And he could have had that same kind of chip on his shoulder that gave him the impetus to do what he did. Same thing with Borg, where Picard was looking at Hugh and had this personal connection. But I'm like, Riker could have also looked at Hugh and been like, you killed my captain. And you know what I mean? So I honestly think it would have been fine. I think I would have loved Riker as a captain. I think seeing Jonathan Frakes step in that role could have been really cool, and to see his evolution over the years. And I think the reboot of Riker would have been fun. I think a lot of the movies would be different because there'd be no Picard. Like, what was that really stupid movie, Nemesis? Maybe that movie would have never happened. Maybe it would have never been made. And wouldn't the world be a better place for that? So I'm going to read your comments and then we'll be done. So PS2 Chipper says, yes, a hologram would be great, just not Andy Dick. And Wingrace says, is Andy Dick ever useful? Yeah, that hologram episode was the worst. You know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of that TNG episode with like Joe Piscopo or whatever, where Data was learning comedy, and I was just like, this is awful. Oh, it was the outrageous Okana. But I think at the time it was probably great. And I think it was the same thing with Andy Dick at the time. He was like a big thing, and that was like, oh my gosh, what a cool guest star. I don't remember liking that episode when it first aired, but maybe I did. I just don't remember. But I know for sure on the rewatch, that's a skip for me. That one's a skip for me. Wingrave says Enterprise wouldn't have been kept away from Earth in First Contact and probably destroyed, so Earth would have been assimilated in the past, and Adam Scott would have rammed the Defiant in the cube. Yeah, I thought a lot about what would have happened in the movie First Contact, but then I was like, I think it could have still happened. Piss2 Chipper says we would have much more of the Riker maneuver because we didn't get enough, right? Wingrave says, oh, but without Picard, the Shinzon clone from Nemesis could have actually been used more effectively as a fake returning Picard. Or maybe Shinzon would have been like a fake Riker. Can I make a bigger eye roll for that movie and its premise? No, I can't. Thank you so much for watching if you're watching live. Thank you so much for watching if you're watching on the replay. Be sure to like and subscribe if you have not already. And I will see you next week for another live stream all about Star Trek. Night.